good evening, everyone. It is so nice to see so many people here to hear how far we've come and where we are as it relates to the Oregon Ridge Master Plan. All along, we promised that it would be a public process. We promised that we would have robust community input, and we're happy to say that we have done just that. And hopefully, you feel as though your voice has been heard. By you being here tonight is also another opportunity for your voice to be heard. So, thank you for joining us. We know you could be anywhere in the world and you chose to be here with us. That being said, so that you don't wait too long with such bated breath, I do want to share that we have made the decision to not allow mountain biking or mountain biking trails in Oregon Ridge Park. And the reason for that is one of the many reasons for that is because we feel as though once a mountain biker would master one particular trail, then curiosity would be as such where maybe we want to master another trail. So we have met with the mountain bike community and shared with them that we are looking at some other opportunities and some other options at other locations in the county. And we feel that would be the best opportunity to include mountain biking here in Baltimore County in county recreation and parks properties. So with that being said, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our consultant, Elizabeth Laudner of Laudner Klein.
Good evening. Thanks very much, and welcome everybody. Kara, could you go back to the QR code slide for a minute, please, just so everybody. So what we're going to do, as we did in October, we're going to do another poll towards the end. And if you want to participate, you can use your smartphone to take a picture of this QR code. Or you can also use the link that Rebecca's put in the chat that if you click on, you can use your laptop or your workstation to access the code as well. Does everybody have enough time to get their phone and get it snapped? To hang on for just a minute so you're sure you're ready? Okay. I'm going to dive into the into the presentation, and if people have needs, we can come back to this QR code before we start the polls. So put in the chat if you missed it, or use the link in the chat. Thanks. So let's go to the first slide, please, on the presentation. Just a reminder of what an incredibly beautiful place Oregon Ridge Park is. This is looking north, 1,100 acres near Hunt Valley, and a team member of ours has access to a drone, and these are some of the photos he took when he was studying the forest cover of the park. Next slide, please. I want to remind you all that Kara and Rebecca and I are on this call, but we're just a small piece of the large team that's working on this project. Our firm, Lardner Klein, is the prime consultant, and Lisa Suri is a landscape architect working with us. She was there also on Saturday if you were at the in-person meeting. CHMGS out of Boston is doing our economics and market viability and recreation program assessment. Environmental systems analysis, besides being the drone operators, is doing all the environmental inventory and impact and mitigation assessment work. MTFA, formerly the John Milner Associates Preservation Architecture firm out of Pennsylvania, is doing the architecture work. They've done measure drawings, and they'll come back with some ideas with schematics. RK&K out of Baltimore is doing very high-level engineering work for us, looking at septic capacity, traffic situations, parking, but again, at a very, very high level for a master plan. And then we have two team members that are on the team for public outreach. Chesapeake Conservancy ran the bilingual ranger program in the park this summer for Spanish speakers, and also did a Latino conservation event in July as part of the national celebration of that week. And CEDO Consulting ran the event on October 8th and worked to notify people by mail and postcards and getting the word out to a number of apartments east of the park to help introduce them to the park as well. Next slide, please. Just a reminder, we've used this slide throughout the entire process this year, but it's always good to remember what it is we're actually charged with doing. Our team is charged with making a master plan. A master plan is a very high-level plan, and it can be frustrating to people because out of a master plan are recommendations for more plans. But it's just like when we say, perhaps this building should change. We will not have construction drawings for that building. We can talk about what has to happen next to get to the point where you get construction drawings. So it choreographs the kinds of improvements that are needed at Oregon Ridge Park for the next 20 years. And that helps staff figure out how to either seek grants or put things in the capital improvements plan or figure out how to fund those improvements. It's all in the intent of supporting recreation desires of the residents of Baltimore County and engaging a broad response from folks in the community as to what they want to see happen. Criteria selection and improvements for trails and park features are part of the plan. And then this came up at our last meeting. The master plan will have recommendations for implementation, timing, and when things happen, staffing, and also the order of magnitude costs. Next slide, please. And again, just a reminder of where we are in the process. We're in the middle square under the Imagine, heading right into the red square at the bottom for plan. As we wrap up this conversation, we will take what we've heard tonight and on Saturday and from emails that you've sent to the email list for the webpage, and that will begin to shape what the final master plan recommendations are. We have not written a plan yet. We have only been doing an analysis and coming up with some ideas. And then we will start putting that all together in an actual plan from now moving forward and bring it back to you in the first quarter of 2023 for your reactions and response. Next slide. And again, just hitting all the things that we've accomplished together, starting in March with the public meeting, and we're now down to the second line on the bottom of discussion on concept priorities and choices, both last Saturday in person and tonight as a virtual discussion. Next slide, please. And then a summary, because we really have worked extraordinarily hard to try to reach out and hear from lots of different folks who love and cherish this park, and also from people who aren't even aware they have this amazing resource in their backyard. So we did 12 group interviews. We got about 350 survey responses over the course of about a month. We had over 100 folks attending the meeting on October 8th. And each of the virtual presentations have run from 40 to 100 plus people. And I would guess we probably had 50 to 70 people on Saturday. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's about the ballpark. So again, just a summary of all the people we've tried to tap and touch and listen to. Next slide, please. So a high-level summary of what we discovered in all of our work from January till October. We looked deeply at natural resources, vegetation communities, high-quality forest lands, where the FIDs or the forest interior dwelling bird habitat is. Those are those big blue blocks. This is a block diagram of the park three-dimensionally on the left. Where the highly erosive soils are, it's pretty black. That tells you you got a lot of highly erosive soils on the site. Your steep slopes, what the watersheds are, where the geology breaks the Cockeysville Marble to the schist. Then we also looked at regulatory constraints, understanding that because of the ERDL, there is no public sewer or water, which can impact how we propose to refresh this park. We also looked at easements and deeds and what kind of use restrictions, if any, were in those. And our takeaway is that recreation use is permitted, and we're not doing anything that wouldn't be within the bounds of recreation use or open space. We looked at park features as a visual assessment. We didn't have a structural engineer, but we did do a fair, poor, good, excellent assessment of various buildings. We looked at trails that way and all the site furniture on the site. And then a needs assessment where we looked at what were the current needs of users, what are the facility usage rates, what kind of permits are you getting, how much money you're getting for a pavilion, what are the trends both locally, the 5-year report that you submit as a county to the state has some data that we pulled. We looked at regional, national demand, and also demographics and zip code data to try to understand whether we were really looking the right way for the next 20 years. Next slide, please. A little bit more just on the recreation needs and demands. This was coming from the number cruncher member of our team who pulled permits, worked closely with Annie Sanchez and Jessica Janetta to understand how many people attend programs, how many people rent the lodge, who rents the lodge for what reason. And out of that assessment, Margaret Bailey's recommendations from CHM for high priority components in the master plan are trail-based activities, trails expansion and improvement. Under park outdoor activities, picnic pavilions, maybe look at where they're located and look at adding more. Upgrading the existing softball fields and upgrading the playground facilities, re-evaluating where the current big playground is located near the lodge. She also looked at the nature center and functions and support facilities and put that in the high priority category. And then the lodge was improving fire safety system and adding air conditioning to the lodge as a high priority. I don't know if you're aware that the lodge can't fill the Sequoia room to its capacity because it has no fire suppression infrastructure in the building. Under medium priority, in terms of the number crunching, the data analysis, is the potential addition of a dog park and an athletic field. And the athletic field in this context would be a rectangular field. Next slide, please. And then the regulatory, I alluded to this already, but no public sewer or water is available. And that could limit some of the event size on that site. And then the easements and the utility corridors and what we could look at potentially incorporating in terms of trails or revegetation in those utility corridors in concert with the utility companies. Next slide, please. The parks feature assessment, again, this is a high level visual. It's not pulling in a team of structural engineers to really get deep into the integrity of the building. But the big takeaway from the lodge is there currently is no air conditioning or adequate fire suppression, and that's a building structure. If you've been in the Sequoia room, you really can't add that without adding a false ceiling, which really takes away sort of the character of that entire room. So the building is aging, and when you look at it in the context of looking ahead 20 years, it makes more financial sense to rebuild it rather than renovate it. The Nature Center is a highly desirable location. It looks over an expansive forest and out the back side of the building. However, the front side of the building is really hard to recognize as a nature center. The building's currently too small for what's being offered in the facility. It has really no level space that's an easy way to expand that facility, and the current HVAC system is inadequate. So again, the takeaway from the architects and the engineers on our team was it makes more financial sense to rebuild when you're looking at a 20-year time period ahead of us than to renovate that building. And the dinner theater, all agreed it's beyond its useful life and it should be demolished. And we're not currently thinking of replacing it in kind on the site. Next slide, please. Similarly, we looked at the concert shell, the picnic pavilions, the playground, the restrooms, and the trail network. And I think the restrooms are a particularly egregious area that needs attention. Most of the public are served by porta potties when the lodge and nature center are not open. So that's an important thing for the master plan to address. How do we have better facilities for folks, along with ADA accessibility issues and erosion on the trail, and then looking at parking in relation to all those activities and its shortage currently. Next slide, please. The natural resource constraints, this is again a really high level. These will all of these slides will have essentially chapters as an appendix to the final document. So you'll be able to see, this is our very high level takeaway, but you can see if you are more interested in all of the work that led to those takeaways. The watersheds, Oregon Ridge has 2 watersheds, Baseman Run and Oregon Branch. Both are of high quality cold water trout streams, home to native brook trout. Baseman Run has served as a benchmark and academic resource for decades. Both sides of the ridge are very steep slopes. Baseman Run is a less developed watershed with a significant fit in high quality forest land. So the 2 images on the right, the upper image, the gray bounded by the blue, are the extent of the large intact forest, the forest interior dwelling for forest interior dwelling birds. Acronym is FID. And then the image on the bottom, the dark green, are the oak forests, and the light green is where it's not oak forest anymore. So that high quality forest on the southeastern portion of the site is particularly of importance. Next slide. So all of this put together, as we step back and said, what does this mean in terms of a planning position for the park? We have designated 3 zones within the park. You can see in the center the Oregon Ridge. That's the ridge itself. That's up at the top of the hill that splits the park about in half. South of that is the lightly touched zone. That's where the trail network is. And if you need to get oriented on the right of the screen, Kara, if you could run your cursor up, please, on Interstate 83 and then Shawan Road and then over to Cuba Road to help people understand where you are. Then Kurtz Lane comes down there. by Cuba Road, and then Beaver Dam, just to remind yourself if you're not a map reader. The lodge is on the north, the quarry and the nature center in what we're calling the active built zone with Cuba Road fields across Shawan Road. And then between the lightly touched zone and the active built zone is the between zone. And again, as we said on Saturday, if you're wordsmithers, we're happy to hear good terms if you could come up with better terms for us. But this between zone is the north face off that Oregon Ridge that's in the Oregon Branch watershed. The south face is in the Baseman Run watershed. Thanks. Next slide, please. So we originally were going to come back in the fall with concept alternatives. And what we found as we did our work, as we listened to people, as we investigated and put the data together, and we talked about several concept alternative ideas within our planning and design team, we discovered there really wasn't significant difference in what we were looking at. Oregon Ridge is often thought of as two parks. Folks who frequent the nature center may not have any knowledge about what happens at the lodge side. And then we met people who didn't even know the nature center existed that are very familiar with the lodge. And what the data found was both sides of the park get about equal use in terms of what can be documented. That's not the informal use, but that's in terms of programs or picnic pavilions, rentals, those kinds of things. So they're both comparable in terms of their use. We end up hearing from a lot of repeat visitors from the nature center. I think we're not hearing as much from the lodge people because lodge users tend to be a one kind of use in some ways. If you think about it being used for weddings, there may be, the bride may only come once, but the use is repeated. And the same with family reunions and conferences. So whereas the nature center people tend to come back to the nature center, and we're hearing very loudly from all those folks, we're not hearing quite as loudly from the lodge people, but there are a lot of uses where people come once, but the use continues. So that's, I think, where you're not hearing as much about how the lodge gets used as much as the nature center side of the park. We also looked, as we were developing the concept ideas, the park has significant ecological value and should have development restrictions in some of those areas. And what we came to understand is ultimately only the terrace area, that northern part of the park where the lodge is, the quarry, the nature center, and Cuba Road, where all those current development areas are, is really what's in play in terms of any kind of alternative thinking for the future of this park. So today we're sharing recommendations with a single overarching concept, and we're asking for your ideas on the puzzle pieces and the building blocks to establish that vision. And we're also asking you to help us identify priorities of what should happen first, second, and third in the next 20 years. So no longer alternatives, it's really looking at how does that terrace area come together and be reconfigured. Next slide, please. We did generate a vision statement, celebrate, cherish, enhance, and educate. Next slide, please. And this is the text that we paired with that statement. You're all welcome to look at this. This will be recorded. It's on the web. If you want to send us comments on the vision statement, we'd be more than welcoming those comments. But bottom line, we're saying the vision for this park unifies the park. It has a robust stewardship of the natural resources, reinvests in infrastructure and amenities to increase accessibility and maximize universal design and inclusion. It enhances its long legacy as a destination for public performances, events, outdoor education, and access to an extensive network of hiking trails, and the continuation of organized recreation activities at the Cuba Road fields. Next slide. In support of that, we developed a number of guiding principles. And again, you're welcome to email us with comments on the verbiage. We're open to your thoughts on this. Our first guiding principle is to ensure that all are welcome. This is to respond to recreational and demographic trends and expand programming to focus on better serving multi-generational visitors. We heard that both from the data and from individuals, that more and more people want to visit, say, a grandparent with a child. And ensure that all park improvements and renovations maximize universal design and are ADA compliant. Next slide, please. 3 additional guiding principles are listed here: practice stewardship and sustainability, enhance circulation. The park currently has 2 parks in one and is disjointed, and there's no easy access between the currently built areas in the park. So how do we address that? Improve infrastructure. Park infrastructure is primarily an issue of parking and potties. They're aged and inadequate, so those also need to be brought forward into this century and work for. Somebody said the slides are not changing. Is that true for everybody? I just saw that pop up in the chat.
Elizabeth, they're changing for me.
Okay, okay. Next slide. Let us know if you're having trouble in the chat, and we can, maybe somebody that's more tech savvy can help you. And two more guiding principles to close out the suite of principles that we've developed. Would be interested if you have ones that you think we're missing also. One is enhance outdoor discovery and play. The park is a portal to outdoor exploration for visitors of all ages and experience. We heard that over and over. It's not just an educational lab for little people. It's for everybody up through postdocs use it as an educational lab. And also to shepherd the performing arts. So there's a legacy of hosting summer concerts, special events, weddings, family reunions, and people kept complimenting us on the actual setting of those events, and that's why they bring those events back to Oregon Ridge. So in a nutshell, those are our guiding principles. The next slide. I want to run through the three parts of the park, our high-level findings and what our recommendations are for each, and then we'll go into our section where we ask your opinion on building styles and things. The first is the conservation core, and again, if you identify where you are by finding Oregon Ridge in the middle, that's where you're out of breath when you get to the top of the hill. And south of that is the Basemans Run watershed. Next slide. And what we found there was it's cold water class 3 trout stream, one of the few reproducing native brook trout streams in the county. That's a pretty big responsibility for stewardship and sustainability. Has a well-defined valley, minimally developed, very steep slopes, and high quality intact forest lands, particularly that oak forest that I pointed out earlier. Next slide, please. Our recommendations for this section of the park, which is about half of the 1,100 acres, is in this section of the park, limit trail use to foot traffic only, no bikes and no horses. Reinvest and improve the natural surface hiking trail network and develop and implement resource management tools. So very light touch in this conservation core that we're identifying in the Baseman Run watershed portion of the park. Next slide, please. The terrace core, let's jump to the more developed section of the park. Again, Cuba Road Fields up on Chewan Road, yellow dot for the nature center, yellow dot for the quarry, yellow dot for the lodge, and then on the right, the Interstate 83 corridor as an orientation point. Next slide, please. The conditions there, that's where most of the built activities are, as I've said. Nature Center Lodge, Concert Hall, Quarry Lake, picnic pavilions, lawn, historic buildings and resources. Circulation, not quite working very well, but there is a circulation system. And again, infrastructure is there, but it could be improved. Next slide, please. Again, recommendations in the built up areas, improve the natural and paved surface hiking trail network and be sure there are at least long segments that are ADA accessible. Preserve the historic buildings and resources, restore the 100-foot stream buffers in the terrace as well, and protect any forest land within that buffer along the stream. Construct a new nature center near the Quarry Lake. So we're suggesting that the nature center where it is right now be relocated and placed near the Quarry Lake and repurpose the existing nature center as a trailhead or an information center, a research station, an interpretive nexus for historic and cultural resources. Construct a new performance stage with some fixed seating. Construct a new lodge type facility. Demolish and do not replace the dinner theater. Preserve the current open lawn that surrounds the lodge for active and passive recreational use and for the occasional overflow parking for larger events. Realign the two triangular fields at Cuba Road to ensure dual play. Right now, only young women can use both fields. Adult League cannot at the same time. Add a small playground, add a rectangular field. And we talked about this on Saturday. It's not showing on the map. Think about adding a paved bike loop for little people. Like if you wanted to teach your 5-year-old how to ride a bike that goes around the perimeter of the Cuba Road Fields site, doesn't cross over to Chewan. And then one of the big moves is to establish a new drive entry from Beaver Dam Road and a new internal vehicular drive between the nature center and the lodge. And then also a new drive on Cuba Road, and then provide adequate parking along those drives for those uses. Next slide, please. That leaves us with this really not very good name called Between Cores in the middle. That sort of is a transition between the more heavily actively used northern side of the park and the very, very lightly touched and minimally developed southern side of the park. Next slide, please. This is the Oregon Branch. It's in the Oregon Branch watershed, which is also a cold water stream. It has the branch. This watershed is larger. It's more developed. It has more residential and agricultural development than the Baseman Run watershed. Baseman Run is a much younger stream. There are equally steep slopes on the north face coming down from the ridge. There is some high quality intact oak forest in the central and eastern portion of the area. And then there's a geological shift at the toe of that slope from Loch Ravenschist to Cockeysville Marble, which is important for us to know, that reflects itself in the soils, which then allows us to talk about septic fields and wells for aquifer and water access. Next slide, please. Our recommendations for this between area are in between the two. In sync with the Conservation Corps, we're saying limit trail use to foot traffic only, no bikes and no horses. We're saying reinvest and improve the natural surface hiking trail network, similar as we did the Conservation Corps. We're saying develop and implement resource management tools, as we said in the Conservation Corps. And the only real difference is there may be some infrastructure that needs to go in there, like septic fields, well water drilling, and there may be some accessible trails that begin to come across from the terrace into this area. So not significant development. It's mostly along the northern edge of this between core. The toe of that slope is where any future development would occur. Next slide, please. So then just quickly, Kara, if you just run through all of these, sort of shows how you take the Conservation Corps. Then you have the next slide with the terrace core and then the between core. And then it all comes together again, and it reflects also the activity level zones that we talked about earlier. Next slide. We wanted to drill down a little bit more carefully. This is an enlargement of the terrace core, and if you can see on the top is where the Cuba Road fields are. Shawan Road is at the top of the screen. And then there's Beaver Dam Road that comes down to the right. The lodge is the red area, and the nature center is in the yellow area. The white lines on this map are existing roads. So the long white one is Kurtz Road, where it ties into Beaver Dam and gives you access to the nature center and the historic buildings. The white line on the right is the short drive that allows you access to the lodge. The blue line is how we're saying, let's relook at how the vehicular circulation works within the park. It would be nice to have a choice. So at 5 o'clock on a weekday evening, you don't leave the nature center and find everybody else is coming home on the northbound lane of Beaver Dam Road, and there's no way for you to make a left turn to get into the queue for that light. So instead, you could leave the nature center and drive along the blue line and exit farther south on Beaver Dam Road. We're suggesting that the main entry to the park on that side of the park be moved to the south, because right now the utility fencing around the utility buildings, which we cannot move, really create not a very good sight line if you're trying to pull out of the lodge. If you look to the left, you have to really look carefully. I said on Saturday when I lived in Boston, sometimes you just close your eyes and hope, and that's almost what you have to do there. I think we leave that exit so that when there are events at the lodge, you could perhaps close that portion of the park off and have a circulation system in it. Similarly, there's a white line exiting currently at Cuba Roads from the fields where the small parking lot is. And we're suggesting adding a vehicular road across the top of the fields, right at the toe of that slope where the forested area is, and have that also exit out onto Cuba Road, which would allow people then to get back on Shawan at the signalized intersection. All of these blue roads are little gray circles. Those are parking pods. We're looking at how do we begin to address the shortfall for parking in the park without creating massive lots like you find currently at the lodge. And our idea is to drop what we're calling parking pods along that road, so that they serve like picnic pavilions. If you were down in the far south below where the lodge is today, and you could add picnic pavilions between the road and the between zone, you could also have parking pods that serve those picnic pavilions. Um, the white squares are potential sites for playgrounds. We're looking at where to relocate the big lodge playground. Currently, if there's a big event like the BSO or Hot August, the playground's not open often for a week because there's too much truck traffic in the setup and takedown of that event. So how can we segregate the playground so it can remain open when those other activities are going on? And that's one of the things we're looking at. Of course, the playground at the nature center would remain. Maybe there's another playground north of that utility corridor, now that there's a road that connects the two. The big stars are really the big building moves. We have the nature center, the lodge, or a multi-purpose room like the Sequoia room, which would be the lodge, and then the new performance facility. And where those land is somewhat in flux, but right now we're looking at keeping the performance stage and the lodge type facility generally in the area where they are today, and then moving the nature center to the edge of the quarry, where someone had suggested in October, maybe you put a boardwalk around a portion of the quarry and then build a marsh behind the boardwalk. Since you can't get any vegetation because the quarry wall is so steep, you put it on the beach side of the boardwalk and use it as a teaching lab. So there are a lot of, it seems like a really wonderful opportunity to make a really stunning facility and also add some educational components to the program, without giving up the other programming that's on the site. I think that describes everything on the diagram. Pretty much the performance event zone and then an education zone. Okay, I think let's go on to the next slide. What we want to do now is get your reactions on some things. We did this with our dots on Saturday, and tonight we're going to do the online polling. So Molly, did you see anybody in the chat that needs to go back to the QR code, or are people good with the QR code?
If we could go back to the QR code, and while we're doing that, I do want to recognize Molly from Senator Heidelman's office. Molly, did you want to say anything? And then we'll recognize Councilmember Catch and give him an opportunity to say something.
Hi. No, I don't need to say anything. Shelly's teaching tonight, so I'm just here to take notes and listen in.
All right. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Catch?
Yeah, thank you, Director Johnson. Look at this plan, and I wish I could have made it Saturday, but I couldn't. And unfortunately for me, I have gotten so many phone calls with so many questions that I can't answer and don't know if they can be answered. And Rosalind, I've just wondered with these questions that I'm getting, I mean, if I think they're premature, I certainly will wait. Who should I ask? I mean, should I ask the people doing the study, or you, or
Sure.
what?
Any questions can go to the Oregon Ridge Master Plan email. Any
Okay.
questions that the community has, that's where we've been directing everyone so we can track them and be able to respond. And so that probably is the easiest place to send them to. If they're urgent questions, feel free to send them to
Well,
Councilmember Catch.
yeah, it is a situation where people say, well, I really don't know what comments to make because I need these questions answered first. And and I mean, I understand what they're saying. Now there's some things like of course I would like to see new parking be pervious. And I hope that the company during the study understands that many years ago that the west side of 83 in this area, that it's not going to have public water and sewage. So please don't count on that. I mean, it's not going to happen. And if there's anything else that information that I can give you that will help you with your study and recommendations, because obviously I know, what's going on there. I know the zoning and all that kind of thing. So I would be there to help you. I really want to help. And I guess what Director Johnson, how how long are my constituents going to have to submit their uh, opinions once they get answers to some of the questions that they're asking me that I don't know the answers to?
Sure, Elizabeth, could you go back to the schedule, please, or the who's I think Molly, you're running it.
Right.
Can you go back to the schedule because we won't have a draft until January, and then we'll have public reaction to that as well. So there's time. This has been an ongoing process
Right.
where I think we've been working on this for about probably 8 months now or so. There's always an opportunity to submit questions or information. Everyone who attended Saturday had all of their questions answered. We left no one with their hands up, I'm happy to say. And it was a really attentive group who had a lot of questions. So we were able to respond to those questions. I think our team's been pretty good about responding to questions that have been asked. So,
So why
we'll
did they call?
continue
Why
in
did
in
why
that
did they
same
call?
vein.
Why did they call me?
Well, I
Yeah,
can't
I
answer
know.
that.
I'm being facetious, really. And they. I guess I'm the source of their questions. Maybe they don't want it. I don't know why you would ask some of these questions, but they weren't asked. It question about, okay, if you move the lodge, you're going to have parking for the lodge, and they're concerned about uh, pervious surfaces, and expanding that and the stormwater management. And I really can't answer that question. And, I want to see, of course, pervious parking. They want to know about lights. I don't know. They also want to know things like the new road system. Can it be used as a cut through? And I said, I don't think so. I imagine that at a certain time that these roads will be closed. I mean, I was only guessing.
So you are correct. So first of all, to answer your question about the water and sewer, no, the consultant nor the department is suggesting that water and sewer be added. I think actually what was discussed was composting restrooms and being more sustainable. So I'm not sure where the water and sewer question came from. We've been pretty transparent and clear all along that we're not trying to bring water mains or anything to Oregon Ridge. So I'm not sure where that one came from. As far as the roads are concerned, the roads would only be utilized as it was presented. The roads would only be utilized for movement inside of the park. They would not be an appropriate cut through the way that I think we're planning on designing them. And the park will be still closed during nighttime hours, similar to the right-hand side of the park where the nature center is. Those bollards or those gates are there. And we anticipate that we will still have gates so that people won't be able to kind of cut through. That was not the purpose of the roads. And it won't be a public road, it'll be a park road, which the public can utilize. And pervious parking. We did talk about having pervious parking pads and not having massive parking lots. That was one of the pieces that we discussed. But at some locations, it will require us, just by the sheer volume of people or occupancy of the building, it will require us to have more parking spaces than at other locations. So, as Elizabeth showed in her map, if we could go back to the map, there were various parking pads or parking locations. You'll see the little gray, I think they were gray, circles. Yeah, those little
Right.
gray circles are kind of parking pods or pads. or parking areas. So the thought was we wouldn't have to have one large or multiple large concentrated parking areas. It would just be for the uses that people will want to use. And our hope would be to be able to have pervious parking. Again, that's a much larger or higher cost than non-pervious. So that will be something that the department will have to look at. But certainly if we had our druthers and, we had ample funding, we would want pervious parking.
These were questions that people asked me, and
Sure.
I have one question myself. I see that on the map, the Oregon Grill is included in the area that's being looked at. Okay, so it's a rented county building with a parking lot. It's a restaurant. It's going to reopen again soon. So um, how is that going to be treated with the final recommendation? I mean, is it the fact that it's on the map is the only reason I'm asking?
Excellent question. So that is on the map is just part of the footprint of the park. It is not something that the consultant nor the department addressed, because the lease for that property is not held within the department. That's held within property management. So that's separate and apart.
Say that again about property management.
So the lease for the Oregon
Oh.
Grill is not held within the department. It's held with property management. So that is not a property that we manage or correspond regarding. It's just part of the imprint of the park property.
Okay, I just okay, that explains it. And because I was hoping that maybe it would be converted into a home and I could live in it. I'm only kidding. I'm only kidding. Did you hear me?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, yeah.
I did.
Okay.
I had no
Only,
comment for that council
yeah,
member.
only kidding, but because it's a beautiful, beautiful place. So okay, and so what I'll do is I'll find the address you're talking about and
We put it in
send.
the chat for you as well.
Okay, and we'll send the questions that I have that people ask me, and I hate to not have answers. I don't know, what's because a private company is doing the study, and the recommendations are going to come forward in the future, and so uh, I, as I said, it might be a little premature for some of the questions that people have, but. Anyhow, I appreciate it very much. And in the chat is the address. And thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to Elizabeth.
Okay.
If we can put the QR code back up so that everyone who didn't have a chance to get it would get it, that would be great. There we go.
Last chance, folks. And to answer, the email address is on the project website. So if you put in your search engine Oregon Ridge Master Plan, Baltimore County, it will come up on the Baltimore County project website. And that email address is there. And that email is monitored by David. And we have a common Teams folder. So we see those emails as well. So that's a super way to send questions that you want the team to answer as well. Okay, last chance. Countdown to 3, and then we're going back to the slideshow. 3, 2, 1. Okay, now we're going to head back. Thank you, Kara, for navigating all of this. And yeah, I think we can go past this one to the next slide, please. And in answer to your question about pervious paving, this is just a statement. The master plan is, again, it's a high level plan. So it's not doing construction drawings. It can make guidance comments, and it's setting the stage for when the department will then go back out and say, it's time to hire a designer to do X, Y, or Z, whether it's a playground or a new building or trail realignment. And the master plan sets some standards that need to be met and some metrics. And one of those can be saying, pervious parking, pavers is preferred, or it needs to be, stormwater management's a huge issue. And when you have a lot of hydric soils like you do, sometimes creating pervious pavers is more challenging than doing other forms of stormwater management. You have to put so much drainage underneath that you're really taking out a lot of soil. So we can set the stage, and then you need to do a deeper dive when you get to the next stage of design and building. But bottom line, because it's Baltimore County, any new structure designed in Baltimore County as a public structure needs to be eligible for LEED Silver. And for those of you not familiar with that rating system, that's the green building rating. There's a platinum, a silver, a gold. There's an independent body that you actually have to submit all of the criteria, and they vet it to make sure you really did what you were going to say you're going to do. Some agencies will build to that. They just won't get the certification because there's a cost for doing that, but the content will be the same. So LEED Silver eligible means that should you want to do the drill, you could get that designation from the Green Building Council. Anything, of course, has to be ADA compliant, and that's a big issue in the park. A lot of it is not fully compliant, and when you're in a topographically challenged, beautiful place like Oregon Ridge, that's even more challenging. So that will just be an assumption. Anything that happens there, LEED Silver is the metric for the level of investment on environmentally conscious building decisions, and then ADA compliance. And this is a nice diagram from the Robinson Nature Center in Howard County that just talks about what kinds of things does LEED give you points for. It's a point calculation system. You could do a green roof, LED lighting, solar panels, using building materials that are obtained within X number of miles of the site. So you get penalized if you send everything from California to Baltimore County. You get points if you buy locally. Sustainable building materials, and there's a whole category of what is considered to be sustainable and not sustainable. Harvesting your rainwater from your roof system, getting cisterns, using that for irrigation. Pervious parking lot is one of the elements that's listed here. Low flow and dual flush toilets, so reducing the amount of water in your septic system. Optimizing natural sunlight in design, so no more of the buildings that became so common that were dark and dreary and you had no daylight in them. You also start to see more operable windows, so on a nice day you can open the window and get breeze. And geothermal technology using for heating buildings. So this is sort of the basic piece for any new structure. Next slide. What we want to do now is start a poll, and it's back to any of you who were in our call in October or at the meeting in October. We did a bunch of dot exercises of what you liked and what you didn't like. It's not a vote. I mean, it's a vote in a way. We're not going to count it as a vote, but it does help us understand what appeals to you and what doesn't appeal to you. So it's just kind of a finger in the wind to sort of get a sense of what the community is interested in seeing in the future. The first question is going to be, what would appeal to you in a new outdoor environmental center? If you were going to replace the nature center, what kind of building style, building character would appeal to you? And on this one, you can select as many answers as you like. The next slide, please. These are your choices. So if you pull up your survey, these are the kinds of things you'd like to see: a building that's contemporary with a lot of glass walls. You'd like a building that's traditional with stone and timber. You'd like a building that's set into the landscape. You'd like big flexible spaces. You'd like specific rooms for classrooms or exhibits. You'd like a formal auditorium. You'd like indoor-outdoor spaces like decks and terraces, outdoor classrooms. You'd like a building style that's very iconic and becomes a new symbol for Oregon Ridge Park, or a building style that's what we call a background building that sort of is quiet. There's no right or wrong answer. We're going to show you 4 different nature centers that we found from around the country. We're going to give you a little bit of vocabulary building, so some of these words may make more sense, but it's also just your gut reaction of what appeals to you. So the first image is of a new nature center up in upstate New York, and we as designers would say this is a more contemporary design with expensive glass walls, and has a really big, open, flexible, multi-purpose room so that you could use it for meetings or events, but you also can use it for displays. So that's an example. If you're looking at your list on your survey choices, you start doing survey choices, this is what our definition of more contemporary and expansive would be. Next slide, please. This is a nature center in Illinois, built in 2015. It's a more contemporary building, again, with a big window wall. The interior spaces in this particular photo really look flexible. You know, it could be set up for a program activity, it could be set up for a meeting, it could be set up for a special event, or some nature centers make a lot of money with baby showers. So it's, you know, what kind of flex use do you have there? It has indoor and outdoor spaces, so you can move from the indoor room out into a deck or terrace overlooking the lake, screened or covered porches. Next slide. This is one that's in Akron, Ohio, and I believe it was probably built in the 70s. It's tucked into the hill. All you see are the entry and exit roofs, and it's of when we did underground buildings. It was fairly popular in the 70s. We didn't do it very well, so a lot of them lost their roofs later and have been taken away. So the roof on top of this has since been removed and is a regular roof, but you still have this feeling of tucking the building into the ground, not making it a big object on top of the ground. So really look upon this as, does it really recede? And it's also a very iconic type building. And again, the room on the bottom, you can see that the light is coming both from a side window, but also from the ceiling, because that's above the sod roof. Next slide. This is a California nature center. Again, probably more contemporary with the sleek wall and the glass. And then big interior rooms, although this seems to be a bit more subdivided with displays in it. So those are the four images just to help understand. And then we can, David's our counter. David, when do you want to close the poll, and we'll show you the results?
Yep, I'll go ahead and give everybody just about a minute to respond. Gives you a chance to think about it, contemplate it.
Again, choose as many as you like, and there's no wrong question. It's just kind of we're just doing a taste test. It's like going to buy a dress. Do you like a blue one or a pink one? There's no right or wrong answer here.
All right, I'll give everybody a 10-second warning. And that's the minute. Kara, if you'd like to show the results.
And then this is just helpful just for us to get a sense of what's important to people. We won't be designing a building. I want to make sure that's clear, but we will be putting examples in the master plan of the type of building. And we do have in our architecture component of our scope funds to come up with an initial program for a building, how many square feet are needed, and do a schematic layout. So it's a bubble diagram of how many spaces are needed and how big it is. Does it stack? Does it go totally on one floor? So we will be looking at that level of building, but we are not doing a building design, just in case people are concerned about that. Is that enough? Everybody's seen the results? Should we go on to the next one? So the next question is, if you were to look at what kind of facility would replace the lodge, we'd all like to keep the Sequoia room. I'm not sure the rest of the lodge anybody's that excited about. But again, when you look at that building, it would be very challenging to try to figure out how to retrofit it without destroying the actual integrity of the space that causes you to like it. So one of the things we're looking at here is if you were going to make another multi-purpose room like the Sequoia room, that's the big lodge room where we met on October 8th. what kind of facility or what kind of space seems attractive for the uses that happen in that facility. It hosts meetings, it hosts conferences, people have their wedding reception there, family reunions. And again, you can select as many answers as you like. And we've pulled some examples, and they're just examples that we found that we thought might fit. So again, next slide, please. We have the vocabulary of the design world. So, would you like a building that's more residential in character? Would you like a building that's more agricultural in character? A building like the current lodge that's more like a ski chalet or a log cabin type lodge, or one that's contemporary. A number of parks are building new sort of venue spaces in the park that can be rented for weddings that are very contemporary. Or does a more industrial type building appeal? Again, the question about indoor-outdoor spaces, and then an iconic building that could become a symbol for Oregon Ridge Park, and then a building style that sort of hangs back and is very quiet, a background building. First images, please. This is one, and again, this is all taste and aesthetics, so we can all agree to disagree if you're not sure that you agree with our definitions. We would say this one is more residential in character in that it has a shed roof. It has a porch. It's got large stone chimney, covered porches. It just feels a scale that's not an industrial building, not a big contemporary building. It's more like a bigger house. Inside, big open space that's flexible. Next slide. This is a building that is literally an agricultural building. It's an old barn from the 1880s that's just been repurposed in the last year as a venue for a park, a regional park with wedding venue, meetings, those kinds of conference facilities. But it's very much a piece of the agricultural landscape in which it sits. So we would call this like an agricultural character. This happens to be a timber framed historic barn, but there are other agricultural styled buildings in the surrounding area that you could pull ideas from. And it also has indoor and outdoor spaces, again, that covered terrace, porch, and then the outdoor terrace behind the porch. Next slide. The one on the left, I have no idea where it's located, but it is pretty much what I would call a ski chalet type model or a log cabin type building. And then the one on the right is almost its counter. This is a building in the Northern Virginia Regional Park Authority, which they just built a couple years ago as a venue space in the Occoquan Regional Park. It's big, open, lots of glass, very contemporary. So again, a ski chalet or contemporary are probably very distinctly different in this image, but maybe one appeals, maybe one doesn't, maybe both appeal. Next slide. And then an interior shot of a more industrial look of a space. This is the third floor of an old silk mill that's been repurposed. But again, it's looking at a pretty big raw space that can be used for different events. It could be set up for a wedding like the Sequoia room is. It could be hosting a meeting. It could be a conference center. It's just a big open space you can manipulate it for different uses. But the vocabulary is much more industrial than some of the other images we saw. Next slide. So fill it out again, answer as many as you like. And there's no right answer. It's just us to get a feel. It helps us. As we write the final report, we'll be putting pictures in of this is the kind of space that would be nice to have at this park, sort of breadcrumbs for the next design team to come in and build that in a deeper dive. So what kind of messaging do we want to give to the next people that would then start doing the design work?
Once again, we'll give everybody about a minute. 10-second warning. Okay, Kara?
That's pretty close. Indoor outdoor spaces comes out a big plus again. Thanks for filling this out. Then we have one more on style and taste, and then we'll move into priorities. If we could go to the next slide, please. Here has to switch. This is what appeals to you in a new performance stage. The concert shell that you have, I didn't mention earlier what our understanding from listening to folks who use the facility and from doing a high level overview of it. The stage is not strong enough for a lot of uses. There's not a way to put lights on it for the like hot August type performances. And it's unlikely to have another 20 years in its sort of fabric covering. So we're looking at how could we make a facility that allows for the high school choirs to bring in their risers, which currently that stage can't hold. So you can have a flex space and different types of events and activities on that. So again, we have 3 images for you to look at. We would say one is whimsical, sculptural, traditional, classic shell. Again, the idea, and a lot of parks will do this, that a building either reflects the character of the park or becomes an identity for the park. A building that sits back and is background to the park. And then because it's this amphitheater and performance venue, we had people suggest in October that they would like some permanent fixed seating areas in front of the current shell. And so we're interested to see if that is a few people or a lot of people feel that way, or how much of the seating should just be flexible, that it could be set up with seats, could be set up with tables, or could it remain lawn, so it's not committed. Next slide, please. This is an example of what I would refer to as whimsical. This is in British Columbia, so I think it really does want to be a whale's mouth in some ways. So it's taking some characteristic of that native landscape and turning it into sort of an identity for the town park. It's also very sculptural, and it has permanent fixed seating. So if you see, this is a very common way for people to do these kinds of shells, where you have a amphitheater with seat walls, or the ribbons of white that you see people sitting on in the trade. We call those seat walls. Those are permanent, and there are a series of terraces that come down. That's terrific when you're at the event. That's pretty much commits it to being a seating area 24/7. So that's the question of flexible space or not. Next slide. This is a shell that's currently under construction in Arkansas. It's very sculptural. All its equipment is in the ceiling, so you don't see it. It's designed so that on one side you could easily do like a movie night with just 50 or 100 people and not feel like you're overwhelmed in the space. And then if you do the other side, you could have like your BSO concert. You could have a large number of people on the lawn. It's all flexible seating, so people are bringing their own seating, so that lawn area then becomes a play area when it's not being used for a performance venue. Next slide, please. And then this is probably a more traditional classic shell, and we included this for a couple reasons. One is one of the critiques of the current concert shell at Oregon Ridge is there's no green room, there's no secure place for like the BSO to walk between the lodge, which they use as their green room, with their instruments, some of which are probably pretty valuable. So they end up having to spend a lot of time tenting and making a secure passage between the two. So one idea is, if you were to rebuild the shell or a performance pavilion, how could you better accommodate some of those user needs? And this one with the 2 wings on the side of the shell begins to do that. This one also had, first time I've ever seen it, an interesting way of looking at seating, where you have the trellis for shade, and then you have pavement under the trellis, but it's set up with tables in this example, but it also could be set up with chairs. So it allows some flexibility, even though it's a fairly permanent layout of that space. Next slide, please. So now, whatever appeals to you, please fill in your survey. David's the counter.
Again, give everybody a minute. Consider your options. And a 10-second warning. All right, Kara.
Excellent. Thank you. Flexible seating is a highly supported. Okay, next slide, please. I have to switch screens. So thank you for your patience. Okay, now we're going to switch. This time you only get to choose one. And we'd like you to help us think through priorities and choices. A big component of the master plan is deciding over the next 20 years, what should be done first, what should be done second, what should be done third, because there's not an unlimited bundle of funds to do this. And the park needs to continue to exist during improvements and refreshments of the park. So we're going to give you a list of things that we have talked about this evening and ask you to choose just one. So the first one will be, what's your first priority? Just one. And then second, same questions, same elements. What's your second priority? And then the third is the same elements. What's your third priority? So we can go to the next slide. And coming up on your phone screen or your computer screen, you should be able to answer what's your first priority. Again, just one answer. Is it reworking the trail network, adding bridges, ensuring the trails meet sustainable design metrics, adding a western trail? So really looking in total at a much improved trail system in the park. Is it upgrading and improving the nature center and rebuilding that near the quarry lake with the boardwalk? Is it visiting and renovating, rebuilding the lodge with a meeting room and event space? The performance stage, the concert shell, is that your first priority, rebuilding? Restrooms, are restrooms the most important thing that should be done first, or are porta potties adequate for what is there? Picnic pavilions, should we add new pavilions right away, refresh, replace some of the existing pavilions? Large playground, is that the first priority for the investment? And should internal vehicle, the road connections and additional parking be the first priority? So what, if you had your druthers, what would you do first, or what would you ask the county to invest in first? You got your timer? We don't have a spacer slide, David, so,
Yeah, the timer is running.
okay.
I think we'll give everybody a minute on this one, and the next two, we'll just give them 30 seconds since they already know what they're looking at. And 10-second warning. Elizabeth, are we going to reveal these, or are we just going to go to the next
No, I think we
question?
should, I'm not sure we're sophisticated enough to do the three at the end. So we
Okay.
should reveal them each time.
Okay.
Okay, this tracks with Saturday. These are the same questions that were asked Saturday with dots, although we added the vehicular connections because a number of people asked us to, they put that on with stickies. So very similar to what we heard on Saturday. Next question, please. So second priority, what would you do second? You had a big chunk of money to put into the park, say, not year 1, not year 2 maybe, but 3, 5, 3, 7 year. Where would you put your efforts in the park? What's the second highest priority to you?
Okay, we'll give everybody 30 seconds in this one. And 10-second warning. All right, Kara, reveal the results.
And I think this tracks a little differently than what we saw on Saturday. I'm not remembering off the top of my head
I
what
don't
the
remember
numbers
either,
were,
Elizabeth.
but I think restrooms and lodge may have been a little bit closer. Okay, the last one on the third priority. Again, the same options. On Saturday, people did add options, and unfortunately, we don't have that option on this poll, but you can certainly send an email saying there's a missing option, which I see some of you put in the chat.
All right, a 10-second warning. Okay, Kara.
I think that is different than.
Yeah, that is different.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Excellent. Thank you for participating. I think we can go back and have the last slide, which actually has the email on it. And then we can turn it open for questions. Again, this email under contact is on the project website, which is also listed here. So if you think we missed the boat, send us an email. That's why we're sharing all this information with you as our cross-check. Or if you're excited about something, let us know that as well.
Absolutely. I'd get all those questions and we send them out to the team for responses. So now if you've put your name in the chat, Molly will unmute you and Drew will call on you. And again, please try to limit your questions or your comments or suggestions to under 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. So we do have comments coming in addition to people asking to speak. So I'm going to read a couple aloud, and then we'll also be calling on people. Starting off, Kathy wrote a couple of different comments about surfaces, about is the current playground rubber or is the redo proposed to be rubber? Also for the proposed rectangular sports field, if there would be plastic turf, synthetic turf being proposed, as well as pervious surfaces using rubber and concerns about toxic chemicals from that. So different surfaces, curious about what would be implemented.
Sure. So the current playground is rubber. It's rubberized surface. It's beyond its lifetime for use. We do not have current plans drawn for the playground, so that will be an open community input process as well. So the answer to that is we don't know because we haven't designed it yet, unfortunately. And the other question about the artificial turf fields, those fields are not slated to be artificial turf fields. One of the things that we like to do so we can get the maximum use of taxpayers' dollars is have artificial turf fields that are lit. So for that very reason, these fields will probably stay grass.
Great, thank you. And then the next question is, will the master plan address staffing needs at the park?
Yes, as we said at the early start of the evening, there will be staffing recommendations for the park as part of the master plan.
Thanks. And then we have the first person who asked to speak. This is Linda Davis. So you have 2 minutes to make a comment. You're unmuted.
Thank you. I want to address the staffing. There have been a series of environmental, I would call catastrophes at Oregon Ridge over the years before your time, Director Johnson. Vandalism of painted trees, which was illegal damage of dozens of mature trees. There's been a mismanaged extensive forest cut, a lapse in deer management for several years, and the neglect of hiking trails resulting in profound erosion. These incidents were the result of a lack of planning and a lack of communication and a lack of transparency. For that reason, I believe that the park needs a full-time land manager to coordinate and monitor and manage and protect the forest, the water, the soils, the plants, the animals, just as there's a facilities manager for the other side of the park. And I don't mean an arborist who knows how to plant and care for individual trees, and not just lawnmowers and snowplowers. I would say that a land manager would oversee the development of an integrated science-based plan, which would include a plan for the design and maintenance of hiking trails, a plan for the long-term eradication of invasive species, a plan for the long-term management of deer at 8 to 10 per square mile, and a plan for reforestation of the cut areas. These tasks cannot be overseen by 3 to 4 disparate county departments. That would be DEPS and property management and recreation and parks. But it really needs a coordinated and long-term plan developed and implemented by someone who understands the specific ecosystem functions of this park and has a broad and long-term stance. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you.
Great, thank you for your suggestion, Linda.
I have one more question, and that is, are those comments will be part of the record, or will only the PowerPoint be part of the record?
Do you mean the video posted?
No, the comments that I just made. Are they embedded in the video that will be saved and as reference, or should I then put those comments in writing and submit them to the email address?
So we have taken note of your comments, so they are in the record.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. So we do just have a comment from the chat. Baseman Run crossing should be minimal and modest. And then Ralph Brown asked for some clarification on goals for deer per acre. Elizabeth, I think you had mentioned.
I'm not remembering off the top of my head. ESA had a number. I don't know, Ben Porter, if you know. I think they were recommending bringing it down to 4 per acre. And I want to say it was much higher. I don't want to say the number, but it was a big number currently. And they were getting that, I think, from county folks on the current deer count. I'd have to go back. We could post it or respond to you. I'll dig it out and send you that information.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, commenting that it seems like maybe it was for square mile instead of acre from the chat.
Okay, so Linda was doing square mile, is that correct? And Mark Burchick, who some of you spoke with at the October 8th meeting as a representative of environmental systems who did the natural resource component, I think was doing it by acre. So that could be the discrepancy.
Okay. And a comment that the DEER program is under Department of Environmental Protection and Sustainability. And then the next question or comment is from Polly. The building of roads and buildings seems to be taking precedence over the natural habitat. The 1,000 acres of habitat includes what is being called the terrace core. What about some traffic control rather than building a new road? Hoping that playgrounds could be natural, and commenting that the nature center's location was meant to be an entrance to the woods itself. So we do have a couple of different people asking about the location of the nature center in addition.
So the team looked at the existing nature center. It's about 6,000 plus square feet, maybe 6,800 square feet. It needs more space for the kind of programs that are being run, more storage space, more space for staff offices, more space for displays, more space for better displays. There really isn't much level land where the existing nature center is. The very original master plan in 1973 called for a 20,000 square foot nature center, 3 times bigger than what's there now. The nature centers that we had images of range from like 6 to 10,000 square feet. And it's just a question of how you have two issues. One is, how do you fit a bigger footprint, the first floor, on a site that doesn't have any level land in that space? And the second question is, if you were to tear down or actually renovate or tear down a lot to renovate the existing nature center, you would lose the use of that facility for a number of months, if not a year or two. So that's a trade-off. I don't think the idea, we had a heated discussion amongst our planning team about, can we renovate or do we need to rebuild? And I think if we were looking at it today, you could keep patching. You've got some roof issues, you've got HVAC issues, you've got squished issues for a lot of people. But when you're taking a 20-year view and you're trying to figure out how do you position the park for the next 20 years, it made more sense to the folks that know this better than I to look at rebuilding a new facility that's bigger. One of the components in our scope, as I mentioned earlier, is the architecture firm will work with the nature center staff to say, how much space do you need for storage? How much space do you need for animal food prep? How much space do you need for staff offices? How much space do you need for indoor displays? It was interesting on the survey we ran, the displays were the most prominent feature that people appreciated about the nature center. So, continuing to make those robust. Are your bird displays outside in the best place? There really isn't much space. The ground really falls away if you were there on Saturday and were with me where the boards were, there really was no extension past where we were on that gravel area by the bird cages. So you're really limited by your physical space on that current site, as much as everybody loves that view. And so our best professional advice is, you got to get a new building that works for the next 20, 25 years, and that needs to be moved to make that happen.
And Elizabeth, let me also add too, we have ADA requirements that we should generally do just because it's the right thing to do, but it's also the law. And so anytime we build something new, we have certain rules, regulations, and laws we have to follow, as well as neither one of those buildings have a sprinkler system, and so or HVAC. And so Elizabeth, I know you mentioned before, the ceilings are not, there's not enough space in the ceilings to be able to retrofit or install those differently. So that also plays into the decision of whether or not it's end of life as well. As it stands now, the lodge is not meeting all of the ADA requirements either. So anytime you do a major renovation, you have to meet the new ADA guidelines as well.
Thank you both for giving an extensive answer to that one. There were a couple other comments similar to that, so I just want to say that we acknowledge that there were these other comments about the location of the nature center. But I do want to cover another question. Could the restaurant be converted into the replacement lodge?
Again, the restaurant is not part of what we're considering our manageable footprint. There's currently a lease with another department on the regarding the rest as it pertains to the restaurant. So we have not considered that in our plans at all.
And from Carol, I think this would be for a nature center or the lodge. Will glass walls be bird safe or bird friendly as recommended by the American Bird Conservancy? Birds do not see glass, fly into it, and can die, especially dangerous in a wooden environment.
Absolutely. There are several options we have there. I think I spoke with someone Saturday about this as well. So, because of the lead silver, there will likely be a lot of daylight sunshine, which means either glass windows or some form of see-through windows. And so, as such, yes, we could certainly put stickers or make sure they're. I think I spoke with someone who talked about trees or flowers or plants being within 30 feet of the windows, which will attract the birds. So we are that will be taken into consideration as well.
Great, thank you. And then a comment from Ralph Brown about solar panels, that solar panels in the field are much cheaper to install than roof panels. Could the field at the corner of Beaver Dam and Shawan Road be used for solar panels that would serve the buildings at Oregon Ridge?
So the thing about installing solar panels is that they are there for a really long time. Depending on the contract that you have, it's either 10 or 20 years. So when you put solar panels on a roof, they can tap the roof for 10 or 20 years, which is good when you look at the lifespan of a brand new roof. But when you look at putting solar panels in a field, that means you cannot use that field for any other use for 10 to 20 years or 25 years, depending on what the contract and the agreement is. So I don't know that that would be the best way to move forward. That is also an overflow parking lot, which means you would not have that space for overflow parking in the future for the next foreseeable 20 to 25 years.
There's some new interesting examples of doing solar panels over surface parking lots. So that could be, Metro is doing that in Prince George's County on some of the more suburban lots. So
Yes, and
that's a possibility.
CCBC. And so they add shade too to the cars,
Right.
and it keeps them cool. I always look for one to park under, and it also stops the snow from falling on your car in case you park when it's snowing or raining.
That's a good suggestion.
Great. The next, there were a couple questions about conservation from Dr. Carol Newell. This short list of improvements does not include other items such as working on removing invasive plants, healing the logged area of the forest, or even retrofitting the nature center or retrofitting the lodge, and commenting that they would like to be able to add items to the poll, options as well.
I appreciate that comment, and our apologies for not having that on the list. It was in the recommendations, and we, I think, just saw that as a parallel recommendation that would move forward. So had we been doing this with stickies, that would have been a good sticky to add to the priority list. So we will take note of that, and I appreciate your bringing that up.
And Dr. Noel, too, I do want to, I'm close to sure that you put that on the notes on Saturday when you were there. So I don't want you to feel like in order for your voice to be heard, it has to be in every single meeting or every single space. So we hear you, absolutely.
Great. And I'll just note that there were other comments agreeing with forest conservation as a priority. And Dr. Carol Newell asked, what are the staffing recommendations that are being considered at this point?
There are none yet. That is part of the CHM scope of work, and in their interviews when they were talking to current staff and finding out where there were needs, they will come back, but we haven't prepared that yet. So it is still to come in the recommendations in the final plan.
And then a question, will the chat items be posted on the master plan webpage?
What was the question, Molly? I'm sorry. Will the chat questions be posted on the master plan webpage?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not. They will be contained in this recording, and our staff have documented them.
Great. And then we do have two people who've asked to speak. The first is Michael Minenson. You are unmuted.
Hi, very nice presentation. Thank you. I would really question the need for a new road through the park between the two areas that you mentioned. Those two areas are now connected by hiking trails, and there's a very good road connecting them, which is Beaver Dam Road, that already exists. And I think that putting a new road through the park would detract from the natural quality of the park and bring cars further into the park, maybe have traffic, danger to pedestrians. And if the only reason for the road or main reason is that making that left turn but out of the park, there must be some other way of managing that problem with traffic control or something like that. Thank you.
So we heard a couple different issues that we thought this addressed. One was the flooding issue at the bridge and the fact that you have a nature center with both of your buildings right now have only a one point of access to or from for vehicles. It's always better to have a backup access. So this would tie in on the nature center side of the bridge. Of course, the bridge can be replaced, but it would also be nice to have a secondary access to the nature center and that area where the historic buildings are. We also heard when we interviewed the big event folks who use the lodge side, like the BSO and the Hot August and the Kennedy Krieger 5K runs, the logistics of the current circulation on that side make it very difficult to run shuttles and to just get people in and out of the site on parking. And so trying to figure out a better way to move people through that portion of the park, which has uses that will continue into the future, we were just trying to unscramble that circulation. So there were multiple reasons. The other reason is you can start to insert picnic shelters along the toe of that slope and also have parking tied to the picnic shelter rather than having a single big lot over at the lodge that then people have to move pretty far away to get to any of the resources on that side.
I would just still, try emphasize to preserve the trails and natural aspect of the wooded part of the park as much as possible. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The next person who wanted to speak was Kathy Lambrow. You are unmuted.
Hi, thank you. I'm probably going to be picking up on many of the other comments about the forest conservation and naturalist, but with a specific question. The master plan does have recommendations for forest conservation, the deer management, erosion control, and invasive removal. And those we know are tasks that are best handled by a natural resource specialist. I think Ms. Johnson made it very clear at the presentation on Saturday that forest conservation is not done by Parks and Recreation, but rather by DEPS. So my question is, will the Oregon Ridge Master Plan be shared with DEPS or other relevant county departments that do have responsibility for some of the recommendations? I know right now you're working on the LPPRP as well as the Baltimore County Master Plan. So the question is, will these other departments take responsibility for any of the recommendations in the Oregon Ridge Master Plan? And who would we contact to find that out?
Thank you for your question, Ms. Lambrow. Yes, DEPS would be included. We met with all of the directors and provided the presentation from Lardner Klein to the directors so that they would be able to give input. Once the final master plan is drafted, then the directors will give input as well. So yes, it will be a collaborative process and they will have input and we'll be able to give feedback.
So would we find, thank you, but would we find out, again, if the forest conservation is a major priority, how will we know, the public know where that's going to fall into the process?
So as it stands now, it falls in with DEPS, the forest conservation piece. And I would imagine unless there's some major change, it would still fall into DEPS. they would have a copy of this master plan, and their feedback will be included in the master plan. So when it comes to forest preservation, that piece would be detailed in the master plan and say that, space is for depths, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm not saying
Right.
exactly this is what it'll say, but it'll say that space will be depth's responsibility, and for example the 2 new or 3 new, however many people they're hiring, will look at that and depth, so it will kind of all be roped in and tied in together, so it will be clear in the master plan.
Right, in the Oregon Ridge Master Plan.
That's correct.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. I do see a couple other comments talking about the road, but I don't see any additional questions or people asking to speak at this time.
Well, I do want to read this one, Molly. It says the architects and planners driving the discussion make more money building new buildings than they would from overseeing invasive species removal. And that's an excellent comment that someone wrote. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to address it. First, we have a consultant for the master plan only. So Elizabeth and team are responsible for looking at the master plan. Elizabeth will get paid the same if she says, to build these $50 million buildings. I'm not saying we're building a $50 million building. I'm just throwing an example out there, versus a $5 million building. It will be the same. We are relying on the consultant Elizabeth with Laudner Klein and team to give their expertise as far as what their professional expertise recommends. So they're not making any more money by saying this or that, but we are relying on their professional expertise. We're also relying on them using public input in order to drive this process and make recommendations. It will be a separate architect that will work on any drawings or projects or plans for actual buildings. And that will be a public process through our procurement office. So they will have certain specifications that they have to adhere to. Traditionally, it's usually a certain monetary amount, certain square footage, and then that's a public input process as well. So, I don't want anyone to think that the consultant that we've chosen doesn't have the best interest of the park, the expertise, and the community input at heart. So thank you for voicing that concern so that we would be able to thoroughly address it.
And if I could just add to that, there are members of our team, including our firm, that probably make more money doing natural resource management plans and invasive species removal and management for those kinds of things. So because our team has different experts, we have people that understand buildings. We also have buildings that team members that earn their living writing management plans from federal to state to municipal level government properties. So those voices are all at the table talking about resources.
We did have another question just come in from Ralph Brown. Since everyone has agreed that trails and forests need immediate attention, what is necessary to move this along as quickly as possible?
So quickly is a nebulous term. Quickly by government standards, what we will start to do, since we know trails will be a priority, is start to put together an RFP or look for what we are trying to move forward with and find a consultant. It will be a public process. We will go through the procurement process. And so quickly for a procurement process, is not quickly by lay people's terms, let me say that, because we have to put together a scope or put together a request for qualifications or request for proposal. It has to be quote unquote out on the street. So give companies time to be able to put a piece together, a bid together, and then submit it. It has to be reviewed. It has to be scored. We have to have individual meetings to ask questions, to work through any questions we may have so that everyone's clear on the scope before it's even awarded and work can begin. So we will start that process relatively quickly, but it is not a quick process. I just want to be transparent on that.
Molly, if you're speaking, you're muted.
Thanks. We do have just comments added. We already have a forest management plan that discusses the invasive issue from Teddy Martello, and then from Kathy, bird-safe windows are a must. Bird-safe glass treatments have lines that are close together and visible to birds, but not so visible to humans. Any treatment which eliminates the outside reflection. And then Dr. Carol Newell said, I've been told that Delegate Michelle Guyton has earmarked funds for the trails at this park. Is this true? How much? And by when will it be issued?
So Delegate Guyton has earmarked $150,000, and so that will be put into the pot for to be able to add to the trails budget and determine how much it would cost. So, and again, I apologize if people think I had bureaucratic speak. I was just sharing with you the process we have to go through. So I don't have dates, and I'm not one to give you dates. That I don't believe we could adhere to. So the process is the process. We're pretty transparent as far as how the process is. Those are the procurement rules of the county and of similar other jurisdictions as well. So, you know, once we have a chance to look at it, we could develop a timeline and be able to get back to you. But having been asked that question tonight, that is the answer that we have. So I hope that answers your question. So $150,000 by Delegate Guyton. We have 7 years to use that funding. It's not going anywhere. We certainly don't want to wait 7 years. So we anticipate that we'll have a plan probably within a year or so.
Kathy Lambro asked who has the forest management plan that Teddy refers to, and I actually think that might be helpful if Teddy Martello could respond in the chat the plan that you are referring to clarify. And right now, I don't see any other outstanding comments, questions, or people asking to speak, unless I've missed anything.
Is Teddy still on, Molly? Can you unmute him?
I will check.
Oh, I see him. Okay. Teddy, you're unmuted. Hello, Teddy? Okay, I don't think we can hear him, or he might be taking another call.
I mean, it might be referring to the 2007 plan. Maybe.
But Elizabeth, you have the 2007 plan.
We have the plans, and I think to everybody's concern, I think it's worth in the master plan suggesting that a revisit either of that older plan or a new plan be done that really lays out the scope of what needs to be done. Everybody knows the issues, and it would be worth having a document that lays out the scope. The master plan can't do that, but it can call for a deeper dive into what are the step-by-step things that resource management needs to do. What's a work plan that needs to happen at the park, whether it's Department A or Department B overseeing that work plan. And I don't think that old document got to that level of specificity, but that's really, I think, what people are looking for, action on the ground, and how does this series of issues get addressed finally? Deer, invasives. And those are multi-year projects. It's not a one and done. So it's figuring out how to fund that and how to attack it and make it work. It's a big task.
We do have a couple of thank yous coming in to both the team working on this plan as well as the residents who are participating. And Teddy Martello wrote that the forest management plan does not fully address the invasive issue, it just mentions the issue without acknowledging the fact that the canopy tree removal exacerbates the invasive issue. Yeah, and then another thank you from David Goodwin.
All right, well, seeing no more questions or comments, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We appreciate all of your comments and all of your input. More to come. Stay tuned and have a great night.